I think what Jim is saying, so that all of you know, in our office, we had a very strict policy in our office that said you could not carry firearms and bring them in. Pursuant to the law that exists now, that's no longer true. I could have 220 employees that come in there if they have a carry concealed firearm and bring a weapon in. In Tallahassee this year, they just realized this year what law they passed. I want you to understand that people tried to come into Tallahassee this year with their guns, with their carry concealed weapon. Everybody goes, oh my gosh, what? And so they put in panic buttons for the legislative members. So, and I just want you to understand, it's a very serious issue, and it's going to be, and I certainly defer constitutionally to everyone on this side of me to the right, but it's going to be interesting to see the United States Supreme Court, if they ever were to see something such as this, where you say you can't bring in a water pistol, but you could bring in the concealed firearm that none of the other protesters may know you have in your possession. So I think it's going to be a very interesting question, and I certainly think that we are challenged on that particular area from a public safety issue, and I think that it's something that we should work on long term in terms of state law.
Well, and then you get the added twist that people have been asking me about the last couple of days, is how does stand your ground play in this whole discussion? That's not going to be one we're going to tackle tonight. We don't have enough time. Let me throw us into another little hypothetical, and then I'm going to start. Have you all been gathering up questions? You got some questions for us from the audience? Okay. I'm going to do one more sort of standardized thing, and then we'll go over to your questions. All right, here's the hypothetical. Anarchy International, I don't know if they exist, but Anarchy International contacts the city, Jim, contacts the city on August 20th, about a week before the convention's about to begin. And they advise the city that they have a group of about 2,000 demonstrators, and they plan on holding a protest rally on the Monday of the RNC at Curtis Hickson Park, followed by a parade up Kennedy Boulevard at 5 p.m. Monday evening. Tampa Police Department is notified by the Parks Department, because the Parks Department is the ones who's doing these permit applications. Tampa Police Department detectives take a look at Anarchy International's website and sees that the website expressly advocates the violent overthrow of the government. It shows pictures of them at the 2008 DNC convention in Denver with carrying baseball bats. And specifically, well, never mind. All right, I've already gone too far. Okay. So Jim, I gave you a little preview on that scenario. In your opinion, would Anarchy International need a permit for their rally and or their parade? And is 1 week advance notice to the city enough, or is it too late for them to apply for that permit under the proposed ordinance?
Well, again, we have a proposed ordinance here that's not adopted by City Council, so we're speaking.
That's a given. We'll give you that.
Solely in hypotheticals here, but under the way that we're thinking about it, yes, they would need to get a permit because they would have a group large enough to require a permit, and we will react with less than two. I mean, we'll react. The ordinance would provide that we would respond to even people that apply less than 14 days before the event, because we're trying to be accommodating as possible to all the groups and allow people to properly exercise their First Amendment rights.
How about this parade route down Kennedy Boulevard, 5 p.m. on Monday of the event? That's their idea. That's what they think they want to do.
Well, what we're working on right now is identifying an official parade route that we hope we would be able to direct the parades to. Because otherwise we've got to take consideration transportation, traffic flow in and out of downtown, public safety, and other considerations. So we'll try to, the best we can, direct people to the official parade route.
Professor, you talked about reasonable alternatives as a key part of this entire analysis. Under this scenario, if the city denies that Kennedy Boulevard protest, which, Mickey, by the way, is our main street right through the middle of downtown, what sort of reasonable alternatives do you think the city is under obligation to offer?
Well, I'm no geographer, and I'm certainly not leader in the room on Tampa geography either, being a bit of a transplant myself. I mean, I don't think they have a particular First Amendment right as a constitutional matter to use a particular street, even if that street is more prominent than others. I do think there is going to be some conversation about accommodating a similar venue, so a public street as opposed to an alley or some sort of purely residential area. But I think reasonableness there is relatively easy to accommodate. I think moving a parade is certainly within the context of time, place, and manner, the concept of time, place, and manner restrictions. The government purpose is pretty clear, and there's lots of First Amendment precedent about relocating.
Okay. We do have some city folks in the audience, including my good friend Santiago. And Santiago saw this permit application. He immediately contacted my other good friend Kirby back there, and he said, wait a second. He said, take a look at this website. These are dangerous people. We can't grant them a permit. Professor, what's your thoughts on that?
That gets
Just kidding, Santiago. I know you wouldn't do that.
And I don't subscribe to any of the proper names used in the hypo, just for the record. I think that's a much more difficult First Amendment question. I think it's very hard to prohibit or to deny a permit on the basis of sentiments expressed on a website, even if they're violent, because of the various doctrines surrounding the First Amendment. So that is a content restriction. I think it would be, which would require what we call strict scrutiny in the business, and many of you know what that is. You need a compelling government interest, and you need a means that is narrowly tailored to achieve that interest. It is a compelling government interest, I think it's fair to say, to protect people from violence, but the way the First Amendment doctrine has worked is that a prohibition would not be narrowly tailored, and the doctrine that would shift to primarily would be the imminent harm doctrine, the incitement doctrine, which is very difficult to establish without the immediate threat of imminent harm. And the precedent that I'm familiar with, and I think it's fair to say, the large body of precedent in the incitement area would not include the projection of violent acts by a group that advocates it as a general matter in another forum like a website.
Jim?
Yeah, John, I would just like to read one section of the proposed ordinance that might answer that question. In determining whether to grant or deny an application for a public gathering permit, would also be applicable to a parade permit, the department director shall not consider the content of the beliefs expressed or anticipated to be expressed during the assembly, the identity or associational relationships of the applicant, any assumptions or predictions as to the amount of hostility which may be aroused in the public by the content of the speech or message conveyed at the event, nor may the department director favor non-First Amendment activities over First Amendment activities. So we have thought about some of those things.
Okay, you've definitely thought about some of those content-based decisions. Julie, last question on that issue. We've decided that the city can't make a decision based upon the content or the nature of the organization. But the question I have is do you think that the city and Tampa Police Department could share that information and the intelligence they've gathered with Secret Service and other law enforcement agencies without any recourse?
Yes, unless the only reasons that they're doing it is to disrupt the parade itself or to in some way attempt to facilitate the mass arrest of every single person who might be here who belongs to that particular group, which would be in violation of their constitutional rights that are in fact protected as has been described.
Okay, excellent. Mickey, we're going to jump, since we brought you all the way here from Buffalo, we're going to jump into some issues about photographers' rights, and Ellyn will all participate, including you, with your blogosphere knowledge. But Mickey, let's talk about three different types of folks who we would anticipate being involved in some aspect of videotaping or photographing this event. I call these three people Ned Network. Okay, Ned Network is the typical network cameraman. He's usually going to stay on the side of the action, maybe on the sidewalk, as opposed to actually in the park or in the action. Then he's got an NBC jacket, and he's clearly identified in that way. We've got Barbara Blogger. Barbara's been a political blogger for 5 years and occasionally sends video to Amy Goodman. She's wearing a Democracy Now! T-shirt. That's for you, Rob. And she's standing in the park. She's standing in the park right next to the stage, videotaping the crowd with her small wallet-sized video camera. The camera's labeled "Property of Democracy Now!" And And then we've got Gail, girlfriend. Gail is the girlfriend of the guy who's up at the microphone. He's inciting the crowd. She's wearing a Tea Party t-shirt. She's been in the middle of the demonstration all night. And she's been taking pictures and videos on her cell phone ever since it began. Mickey, tell us any differences in terms of practical differences, legal differences in what you've experienced in terms of how these three different types of photojournalists might be treated by the law.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I strongly believe that the rights of the press and the public are coextensive. That said, there needs to be some distinguishing between when the police issue an order to clear out and then the press, the traditional press, I'll call it, doesn't move. I've been dealing with issues where they get arrested along with everybody else. The problem also comes in where many times when you are, and again I'm going to use that term, traditional media, you're told you can shoot, but you need to be in the press pen, wherever that is, whereas the general public is out there. So by and large, the press may not have any greater rights than the public, but they certainly don't have any less rights. And what we've been finding around the country is very oftentimes, since the police may figure that a professional press, traditional person knows what he's doing a little more than somebody who's just picked up a camera and is figuring out which end to look in, that it's better to put them out of the way, and this happened in Zuccotti Park. Clearly, NYPD credentials are probably the hardest press credentials to come by. And the night before, an hour before the police went in there, they went around, they said, everybody with NYPD credentials, raise your hand. And everybody thought, oh, okay, well, they'll give us some access. So they all raised their hand, and they all got carted away and put behind the police command van where they couldn't see anything and they couldn't hear anything. And that's one of the real problems that we have, is when the press is allowed less access than the general public. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's an answer.
Okay. Yeah, there is no clearer answer. I've got a good question here from the audience. It says, what rights do I have if the police confiscate my property? I assume that probably means hand in hand with an arrest. And Julia, help us out a little bit. If the police make an arrest, let's say for trespassing in the park too late at night, or holding a protest someplace the police had prohibited, can they confiscate your property? And I want to jump back a little bit to Mickey, where you were before. Is can they confiscate your camera and the media that's on your that's on your camera? Can they look at your images and your video? And you don't have to answer that one. We can throw it back to Mickey. But if you want to speak to, can they confiscate your property?
Unfortunately, as we all know all too well, they can do anything they want. The problem is afterwards, when we try and sort it out, was it legal, was it lawful, was it constitutional? At that moment, they have a badge, they have a gun, they have the authority. You're going to lose the argument, no matter who you are. If you were carrying around an original copy of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and we're holding it up, it wouldn't make any difference at that moment. So can they confiscate it? Yes. Should they confiscate it? If they believe that there is some evidence of a crime under exigent circumstances, they can seize it in order to preserve the fact that they don't want that evidence destroyed. Now, it's counterintuitive that the media who's out there to capture images are then going to go and delete those images immediately after taking them. The question really becomes is, once they seize it, can they then view it? And without your consent, many times they'll say, can I, now we have digital cameras, it's not film, so can I see what images you took? Or can you play back that recording to me? You have absolutely no obligation to do that. And if they seize your camera, they need the proper legal authority to then actually look at it. So they have to preserve that evidence as clearly, and that's the reason they've taken it to begin with, ostensibly.